Hi, everyone. This is Mr. Schaff. I am going to be going over some things with ecology that we need to be learning about. So, when we are looking at this section, there's a few things that I've combined a couple of sections from the book that we're going to talk about that all these parts end up fitting with one another. So that's what we're going to be starting with. So when we have this key concept here, ecology is the study of the relationships among organisms and their environment. That's what we are going to be looking at with ecology there. So when we talk about ecologists, they're going to study the things around them at different levels of organization. So when we talk about ecology, ecology is the study of the interactions among living things and other living things, and then all the things surrounding them as well. So all the things that are not alive. So the environment is another way of saying that. Okay, so when we are looking at the levels of study that an ecologist would look at, the bottom level that we would have is going to be like we see right over here with this organism. So that's going to be really the smallest that they would go when we're talking about ecology, is just a single organism. So in this case, we've got an alligator. Next step up from that is going to be if you take a group of alligators and having them together, we'd refer to that as a population. So if we're talking about the classroom, we'd have one student that would be a species or an organism, and then the whole group of you would be a student population that we have in the classroom. Going up from that, we are talking about a community. So a community is going to be other organisms other than the ones you're talking about. So in this case, it's not just the alligators, it's the birds, it's the fish that would be there in that water area, or the person on the boat there would be a part of that community, and the plant life would be there as well. So a community, again, is just a group of different species living together in that one area. So the school could be considered a community because we've got students, we've got teachers, we've got administrators, all of those things. Then the next step up from that would be ecosystem. So, ecosystem, when we look at that, it's going to be all of the organisms as well as the climate of the area, the type of soil, the water amount that they have. So it's going to be all living things and non-living things together in that area. And then the largest one is going to be a biome, and a biome is going to be an area that has a typical climate and typical organisms that are going to be living in that area. There is a step above this that I don't have it on this slide. It's the biosphere, which is the whole Earth. So that's what the biosphere is. So it would be biosphere, ecosystem, community, population, organism. Now, when we talk about the living things and non living things, every ecosystem includes both of those. And that's what the terms are at the top of the page right there. So, biotic and abiotic. So, when we talk about biotic factors are living things. So, example would be plants, animals, fungi, bacteria, anything that is considered a living thing, like we had talked about earlier at the beginning of everything when I had you guys doing that activity, the Martian in the car. That was talking about things that were alive and what made things alive. When we talk about abiotic factors, abiotic, anytime you have that in front of a word, it means without. So it's going to be things that are not living. So moisture, temperature, wind, sunlight, soil, um, anything that you can think of that is not actually alive. You could even throw viruses in there, would be a part of an abiotic uh, part of the environment. So when we change one factor in ecosystem, we have to realize that it can change other parts as well. So when we talk about biodiversity, biodiversity is the variety of life in an area. So it's all the living things that we find in the ecosystem. So if you change one thing, we're going to end up finding out that can change lots of other things. So, for example, we have rainforests. Have the largest amount of biodiversity on the planet, larger than other locations in the world. So, when we threaten the biodiversity there, that has a big change on that area that's there. We also see this effect with oceans and things like that. When we talk about an ecosystem, there's a lot of times what we refer to as a keystone species. So when we talk about that, that's an organism that has an extremely large effect on an environment, larger than what you would think it would. So if you were to remove that, that whole ecosystem could collapse. It's called a keystone because if you look at this picture right here where we've got this arch, that stone in the middle is called a keystone. It holds that arch up. If we pull that keystone out, that whole arch is going to end up collapsing. So the book gave an example of a keystone species of being a beaver. They're going to end up making a dam, and they're going to back up water. That's going to increase the bird population. You're going to be able to get fish there, nesting areas for other organisms. So if we were to remove the beaver from that area, it would be a totally different ecosystem that we would end up seeing there, and that whole ecosystem would end up changing. There's also an example of giant sea otters that ended up having a large effect, and this was Pacific Northwest. They were hunted and for their pelts and everything, and they didn't know what they were doing for the environment that they were a keystone species. So the sea otter fed on sea urchins. Sea urchins would feed on uh, the giant kelp, which you would have in the water, which would be we refer to as a kelp forest, which is like a regular forest, and you'd have lots of different wildlife in that area. So when we removed the sea otters, the sea urchins had nothing that was eating them, and they ate away the roots of the giant kelp, and the kelp forest floated away, and that ecosystem was decimated then. So we realized what had happened and reintroduced giant sea otters to bring that back. So another thing in this unit is looking how energy ends up moving through an ecosystem. So life in ecosystem, it's going to require energy as a source. So that energy originally ends up coming from the sun. So, but the producers are going to be the ones that convert the sun's energy into a usable form. So examples of producers are things like plants. We also call them autotrophs because they are going to be able to make their own food. So, again, plants, some algae, some bacteria will fall into this category. The next step when we're looking at this would be what we would call consumers. So, anything that needs to eat a plant or eat something else to be able to get its energy. So that is going to be a consumer. Another name for them is a heterotroph. Hetero means different. So it's going to be feeding on something that is hopefully different than itself. So when we talk about this, all producers need to obtain their energy from the sun, and we refer to that process of capturing the sun's energy and converting it into a usable energy source for themselves as photosynthesis. There's another process that's like photosynthesis called chemosynthesis, where certain bacteria are going to be able to take chemicals from their environment and convert those into an energy source that would be usable for them. So those two are sort of similar but different as we end up looking at that. So hopefully this ends up helping you with the section questions. That is it for this video.